Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Dune, Part 2 2024 Movie Review. Dune, Part 2 is a 2024 American epic space opera film co-produced and directed by Denis Villeneuve, who co-wrote the screenplay with Jon Spaihts. The sequel to Dune, 2021, it is the second of a two-part adaptation of the 1965 novel Dune by Frank Herbert and the second installment in Villeneuve's Dune film trilogy. It follows Paul Atreides as he unites with the Fremen people of the desert planet Arrakis to wage war against House Harkonnen. Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Josh Brolin, Stellan Skarsgård, Dave Bautista, Zendaya, Charlotte Rampling, and Javier Bardem reprise their roles from the first film, with Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken, and Léa Seydoux joining the cast. Development began after Legendary Pictures acquired film and television rights for the Dune franchise in 2016. Villeneuve signed on as director in 2017, intending to make a two-part adaptation of the novel due to its complexity. Production contracts were only secured for the first film before the second film was greenlit by Legendary in October 2021, subject to the success of the first. Principal photography took place in Budapest, Italy, Jordan, and Abu Dhabi between July and December 2022. Delayed from a November 2023 release date due to the 2023 Hollywood labor disputes, Dune, Part 2 premiered at the Auditorio Nacional in Mexico City on February 6, 2024. It was released in the United States on March 1, to positive reviews and was a box office success, grossing $715 million worldwide, surpassing its predecessor and becoming the seventh highest grossing film of 2024. It received numerous accolades, including being named one of the top 10 films of 2024 by the American Film Institute. It received 5 nominations at the 97th Academy Awards, including Best Picture, winning Best Sound and Best Visual Effects. It also won 2 BAFTAs for Best Sound and Best Special Visual Effects, and received 2 nominations at the 82nd Golden Globe Awards, including Best Motion Picture, Drama. Dune, Part 3, a third film based on Herbert's 1969 novel Dune Messiah, is in post-production and scheduled to be released on December 18, 2026. Following the defeat of House Atreides by House Harkonnen, a Princess Irulan, daughter of the Padishah Emperor, Shaddam 4 records in her journal her father's betrayal of the Atreides. On the planet Arrakis, a Fremen tribe led by Stilgar accompanies Paul Atreides and his pregnant Bene Gesserit mother Lady Jessica to Siege-Tabr. Some Fremen suspect they are spies, while Stilgar and others see signs of the prophecy that a mother and son from the outer world will bring prosperity to Arrakis. The Fremen accept Paul, but Stilgar commands Jessica to succeed Siege-Tabr's dying Reverend Mother by ritually drinking the normally fatal water of life. She uses her Bene Gesserit training to transmute the poisonous liquid and survive, inheriting the memories of past Reverend Mothers. The liquid prematurely awakens the mind of her unborn daughter, Alia, allowing Jessica to communicate with her. They agree to focus on convincing the more skeptical Northern Fremen of the prophecy, which Chani and her friend Shishakli correctly deduce is a Bene Gesserit myth fabricated to manipulate the Fremen. Nonetheless, Chani begins to respect Paul after he declares that he only seeks to fight alongside the Fremen, not rule them. Paul and Chani fall in love as he immerses himself in Fremen culture, learning their language, becoming a Fedaykin fighter, riding a sandworm, and raiding Harkonnen spice harvesting operations. Paul adopts the Fremen names Yozulbi and Muad'Dib. Due to the spice raids, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen replaces his older nephew Rabban as the ruler of Arrakis with his favored nephew, the cunning and sadistic Phaedra. Lady Margot Fenring is sent by the Bene Gesserit to evaluate Phaedra as a prospective Kwisatz Haderach by securing his genetic lineage. Jessica travels south to unite with Fremen fundamentalists who strongly believe in the prophecy. Paul remains in the north, fearful that his visions of an apocalyptic holy war will come to pass if he goes south as a messiah. During a raid on a smuggler spice harvester, Paul reunites with his mentor Gurney Halleck, who leads Paul to house Atride's hidden atomic warheads. But Paul is forced to journey south after Phaedratha unleashes a devastating attack on Sechtabr, and personally kills Shishakli. Upon arrival in the south, Paul drinks the water of life and falls into a coma. Jessica uses the voice to compel Chani to save Paul. She gives Paul a mixture of her tears with the water of life, which awakens him. With his emerging prescience, Paul perceives countless possible futures and identifies a narrow path to victory, along with a vision of an adult Alia on a water-covered Arrakis. He also discovers that his mother is the Baron's daughter and that the Bene Gesserit orchestrated her union with Duke Leto Atreides to merge Harkonnen and Atreides bloodlines in their plan to create the Kwisatz Haderach. Paul declares himself the messianic figure Lisan al-Gaib after gaining the Southern Fremen's support by demonstrating his ability to know their deepest thoughts. He threatens to destroy the spice fields, forcing Shaddam IV to come to Arrakis with Irulan and his elite Sardaukar. The Fremen use his arrival to launch an offensive using atomics and sandworms that overpower the Imperial Sardaukar. Gurney leads a Fremen assault on Arrakeen, killing Harkonnens as well as Beast Rabban. After capturing the Imperial court and executing Vladimir Harkonnen, Paul challenges the Emperor for the throne and, to Chani's dismay, demands to marry Irulan. More great houses, who were secretly summoned by the Baron, arrive in orbit, but Paul threatens to destroy the spice fields if they intervene. Phaedratha, who volunteers to be the Emperor's champion, is killed by Paul in a duel. Irulan agrees to marry Paul on condition that he spare her father. The Emperor surrenders, but the Landsraad reject Paul's ascendancy, so he orders the Fremen to attack the orbiting fleet. As Stilgar leads the Fremen onto the captured Sardaukar ships, Jessica and Alia reflect on the beginning of Paul's holy war. A devastated Chani refuses to bow to Paul and departs alone on a sandworm. In November 2016, Legendary Pictures obtained the film and TV rights for the Dune franchise, based on the eponymous 1965 novel by Frank Herbert. Vice Chair of Worldwide Production for Legendary Mary Parent began discussing with Denis Villeneuve about directing a film adaptation, quickly hiring him after realizing his passion for Dune. In February 2018, Villeneuve was confirmed to be hired as director, and intended to adapt the novel as a two-part film series. Villeneuve ultimately secured a two-film deal with Warner Bros. Pictures, in the same style as the two-part adaptation of Stephen King's It in 2017 and 2019. In January 2019, Joe Walker was confirmed as the film's editor. Other crew included Brad Riker as supervising art director, Patrice Vermette as production designer, Paul Lambert as visual effects supervisor, Gerd Nefzer as special effects supervisor, and Thomas Struthers as stunt coordinator. Dune Part 2 was produced by Villeneuve, Mary Parent, and Cale Boyter, with Tanya Lapointe, Brian Herbert, Byron Merritt, Kim Herbert, Thomas Tull, John Spates, Richard P. Rubenstein, John Harrison, and Herbert W. Gaines serving as executive producers, and Kevin J. Anderson as creative consultant. Legendary CEO Joshua Grode confirmed in April 2019 that they plan to make a sequel, adding that there's a logical place to stop the first movie before the book is over. In December 2020, Villeneuve stated that due to Warner Bros.' plan to release the film in theaters and on HBO Max simultaneously, the first film could underperform financially, resulting in cancellation of the planned sequel. In an IMAX screening of the first film's first 10 minutes, the title logo read Dune, Part 1, lending credence to plans for the sequel. In August 2021, Villeneuve spoke more confidently about the chances of a sequel film, iterating his excitement to work with Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya again, while stating Chani would have a bigger role in the sequel. Warner Bros. Assured Villeneuve a sequel would be greenlit as long as the film performed well on HBO Max. Just days prior to the first film's release, Warner Bros. CEO Ann Sarnoff stated, "Will we have a sequel to Dune? If you watch the movie you see how it ends. I think you pretty much know the answer to that." On October 26, 2021, Legendary officially greenlit Dune, Part 2, with a spokesperson for the company stating, "We would not have gotten to this point without the extraordinary vision of Denis and the amazing work of his talented crew, the writers, our stellar cast, our partners at Warner Brothers, and of course the fans." Here's to more Dune. Production work had occurred back-to-back with the first film, as Villeneuve and his wife Lapointe immediately took a flight to Budapest in order to begin pre-production work. A key point of negotiation prior to green-lighting the sequel was assuring that the sequel would have an exclusive window where it would only be shown theatrically, with Legendary and Warner Brothers agreeing to give Dune Part 2 a 45-day window before it would be available through other channels. Villeneuve said this theatrical exclusivity was a non-negotiable condition, and that the theatrical experience is at the very heart of the cinematic language for me. With Dune Part 2 being greenlit, Villeneuve said that his primary concern was to complete the filming as soon as possible, with the earliest he expected to start in the last quarter of 2022. He noted that production would be expedited by the work already done for the first film. Eric Roth was hired to co-write the screenplay in April 2017 for the Dune films, and John Spates was later confirmed to be co-writing the script alongside Roth and Villeneuve. Game of Thrones, 2011 to 2019, language creator David Peterson was confirmed to be developing languages for the film in April 2019. Villeneuve and Peterson had created the Chicopsa language, which was used by actors on set. In November 2019. Spates stepped down as showrunner for Dune Prophecy, 2024, present, to focus on Dune Part 2. In June 2020, Greg Fraser said, "It's a fully formed story in itself with places to go. It's a fully standalone epic film that people will get a lot out of when they see it." Between the release of Dune and the confirmation of Dune Part 2, Villeneuve started working the script in a way that production could begin immediately once the film was greenlit. By February 2021, Roth created a full treatment for the sequel, with writing beginning that August. He confirmed that Feyd-Rautha would appear in the film, and stated he will be a very important character. In March 2022, Villeneuve had mostly finished writing the screenplay. Craig Mazin and Roth wrote additional literary material for the film. Villeneuve stated that the film would continue directly from the first, and specifically described it as being the second part. He described the film as being an epic war movie, adding that while the first film was more contemplative, the second would feature more action. Villeneuve sought to anchor the movie to the characters, primarily Paul and Chani. With the two featured in an epic love story between them, Villeneuve described them as the epicenter of the story. Zendaya initially found difficulty in creating dialogue, commenting that it was funny trying to figure out in this futuristic space talk, like, how do they flirt? Chalamet also added that Paul would be heavily influenced by Chani, serving as his moral compass. Paul becomes deeply embedded in Fremen culture, developing a closer bond with Stilgar, who becomes his surrogate father figure and mentor, while tensions emerge between Chani and Lady Jessica, as Chani is aware that Jessica's schemes negatively impact the Fremen. The script ultimately conveys Chani as a non-believer of the prophecy and intended for its structure to first convey their romantic relationship from Paul's perspective, and eventually pivot to Chani's perspective as the audience realizes Paul's desire for power and insidious nature. He focused on Herbert's original intention to depict Paul as an antihero in Dune, on his way to becoming a villain, and wrote the script with that in mind while also considering his future plans regarding Dune Messiah, 1969, particularly by modifying Chani's characterization as he felt that she eventually disappeared in Paul's shadows in the book. Feeling he had the benefit of time in doing so, Villeneuve decided to use all the elements of Paul's character arc and play them a bit differently in order to establish his eventual transformation into a villainous figure and becoming what he was trying to fight against. He expanded the role of Chani and Lady Jessica from the novel, and interpreted Chani as being a critique of power. When envisioning the sandworm sequence, Villeneuve primarily relied upon his own drawings and storyboards, as he felt the book did not contain adequate descriptions. He later cited it as being one of his favorite scenes in the film. 46 When writing Paul's character arc, he considered Paul as transforming from a humble figure to a dark messianic figure, and took inspiration from Katsuhiro Otomo's Akira, 1988, when designing the storyboards. Villeneuve felt the film's ending was more tragic than that of the book, feeling that it adequately resolved Paul's storyline across the Dune films while setting up his character arc for a potential third film based on Dune Messiah. Following the first film, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen is described as being heavily debilitated and reliant upon being submerged in fluids, while focusing on choosing an heir, Glossu Beast Rabban or Phaedra, both his nephews. Rabban was regarded as being a bad strategist, while Phaedra is shown to be clever, cunning, and charismatic. Actor Austin Butler felt Phaedra's character served as flip sides of the same coin to Paul, as both had been involved in the Bene Gesserit's genetic breeding program. Butler opined that Phaedra's upbringing on Jedi Prime and self-care for his body explained his arrogance. Meanwhile, Villeneuve noted his psychopathic personality and brutality similar to that of an animal, contrasted with his code of honors and reverence for fighters. Lady Jessica is heavily traumatized by the death of Duke Leto, being compared to Paul as a survivor and strategizing to realize the ambitions of the Bene Gesserit, who aim to fulfill their prophecy to maximize human potential, disregarding morality and ethics. There is additional focus on the political aspect, with Princess Irulan fearing that her father, Emperor Shaddam IV, will lose his throne due to his loss of influence over warring factions. During the sequence of Paul's consumption of the water of life, Villeneuve deliberately altered the time frame to depict an adult Alia for a dramatic effect, and to highlight Alia's unique birth. He and Spates decided to compress the time for both the sequence and Lady Jessica's pregnancy in order to establish more narrative tension. He added that Lady Jessica's conversations with an embryonic Alia was unique, as he felt it was fresh and original to have a character who is powerful and still a pregnant woman while also conveying how others perceive Alia as an abomination. Like Chani and Lady Jessica, Villeneuve further developed Princess Irulan's character and motivations from the novel, with actress Florence Pugh noting her reserved nature and intelligence. In March 2022, Pugh and Butler were reported to be in talks to star in the film as Princess Irulan and Harkonnen heir Phaedra, respectively. Butler was offered the role while having coffee with Villeneuve, without needing to audition. He trained for 4 months in Budapest, using a fitness regimen made by an ex-Navy SEALs member. Villeneuve described his performance as being a cross between a psychopath killer, an Olympic sword master, a snake, and Mick Jagger. While Butler researched past cultures he felt bred brutality and took inspiration from various animals including sharks and snakes. Butler said that he drew inspiration from Gary Oldman and Heath Ledger for his performance. He imitated Skarsgård's voice as the Baron, as he felt that Fade would be influenced by the Baron due to growing up with him. In May, Christopher Walken joined the cast as Shaddam IV. In June, Lea Seydoux entered negotiations to join the cast as Lady Margot Fenring. In July, Suhaila Yaqub joined the cast as Shishak Lee. In January 2023, Tim Blake Nelson was added to the cast in an undisclosed role. Attending the film's London premiere in February 2024, Anya Taylor-Joy confirmed that she had been cast in the film. Villeneuve was surprised that her role had been kept a secret for that long, noting it required so much work to keep that secret. Her role had been revealed in a casting credit list for the film on Letterboxd. Pre-shooting began on July 4, 2022, at the Brian Tomb in Altievole, Italy, for 2 days. Principal photography was set to begin on July 21 in Budapest, Hungary, but began earlier on July 18. The film was entirely shot using ARRI Alexa LF digital cameras, with new filming locations and sets being used to avoid repetition. In October 2022, Chalamet took a break from filming in order to attend the premiere of Bones and All, 2022. The production team managed to shoot during the partial solar eclipse of October 25, and used the footage for the opening fight scene between Harkonnen and Fremen soldiers. While the scene called for an eclipse, Villeneuve did not know beforehand that filming would coincide with an actual eclipse. In order to ensure that the sun was behind Lady Jessica in a shot where she kills a Harkonnen soldier with a rock, Cinematographer Greg Fraser calculated that the shot needed to be filmed at precisely 9:45 in the morning on November 3. That month, production moved to Abu Dhabi and Pugh finished her scenes. Certain scenes set at dawn had to be filmed across 3 days to take advantage of the golden hour. A special unit of production filmed scenes with Taylor-Joy in the Namib Desert. Filming wrapped on December 12, 2022. Due to the delays, Villeneuve was able to make a film transfer for projection using the IMAX 70mm and conventional 70mm film formats. Pugh delivered Princess Irulan's opening narration during her first day of filming and for overall production. Villeneuve and Fraser filmed Phaedradha's gladiator sequence with specially designed black and white infrared cameras. They wanted the Harkonnens to cheer and stomp rather than applaud, and designed over 30 sections for spectators in the arena. Butler spent his first week on set filming the scene, while the set had very high temperatures that caused some people to faint. 74 He also improvised his kiss scene with the Baron. For romantic scenes between Paul and Chani, the scenes were primarily filmed in remote locations in Jordan during the golden hour. The scenes were often filmed as quickly as possible, with only a 1-hour window being available. The scene of Paul's sandworm ride was filmed practically on a production unit, separate from the main one, led by producer Tanya Lapointe and a special team. Chalamet filmed his scenes on a platform meant to imitate a portion of the sandworm, with gripping devices serving as the reference for the Furman hooks. An industrial fan blew sand on set to emulate the desert climate. Chalamet estimated the scene took over 3 months to film, with individual shoots occurring over a span of 20 to 30 minutes. As the actual sandworm was not built and there were no reference shots, the production team designed a small portion of the worm on set and the actors had to physically visualize and imitate riding the sandworm. Butler and Chalamet separately trained with a Kali instructor in Los Angeles for the climactic battle between Paul and Phaedradha. They were excited to do the scene, and immediately began practicing once they later met in Budapest. They performed the scene by themselves, including for wide camera shots. Chalamet delivers the monologue entirely in Chicopsa. Ferguson cited Lady Jessica undergoing the Reverend Mother process as her favorite scene, working with contortionists for the scene and comparing it to an Exorcist film. Hans Zimmer returned to compose the film's score after doing so for the previous film. Zimmer had composed over 90 minutes of music prior to the announcement of the film to help give Villeneuve inspiration when writing. 2 singles were released on February 15, 2024, by Watertower Music, titled A Time of Quiet Between the Storms and Harvester Attack. The full soundtrack album was released on February 23. A teaser trailer for Dune, Part 2 was presented during the Warner Brothers panel at Cinemacon on April 27, 2023. First look footage of the cast in character were released online, alongside a teaser poster, on May 2, 2023. The trailer was released to the public the following day. Variety called it breathtaking. GQ hailed the shots of Paul riding a sandworm as the standout sequence, and Fangoria remarked, "If you're not excited for this one, we don't know what to tell you." Chalamet and Zendaya later discussed and promoted the film at a Warner Brothers presentation at Cine Europe on June 21. A second trailer was released on June 29, 2023. Chris Evangelista of Slash Film was excited about the appearance of Walken as Emperor Shaddam IV. Ben Travis of Empire praised the seismic and astounding, none more eye-boggling imagery, feeling the scope to be particularly expansive, and noted the monochromatic footage depicting Butler's Phaedradha while calling the footage of Walken's appearance impactful. Joshua Rivera of Polygon opined the trailer, simply put, rocks, and enjoyed the footage present. The film was promoted during the December 2023 CCXP with Chalamet, Zendaya, Pugh, Butler, and Villeneuve, where over 10 minutes of footage was released. Additional footage from Dune, Part 2 was shown during a limited IMAX theatrical re-release of Christopher Nolan's Tenet, 2020, as part of Warner Brothers' celebration for the former film's release. Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures partnered with Xbox to provide an immersive content suite related to the film, and visual designs inspired by the film being featured on a floating controller, Xbox Series X, and a console holder. Microsoft Flight Simulator also included an expansion pack allowing players to explore Iraqis and pilot the Royal Atreides ornithopter. In November 2023, the Sardaukar were added to Call of Duty: Modern Warfare 2, 2022, in a collaboration pack. 99 a month later, Paul and Phaedra were added as playable operators to its sequel, Call of Duty: Modern Warfare 3, 2023, with an additional Harkonnen soldier skin being announced in March 2024. In September 2023, McFarlane Toys announced a new line of 7-inch figures modeled after characters from the sequel film. Legendary Comics will release Dune, Part 2, the official movie graphic novel, with the help of Kickstarter in the same way the previous adaptation was published. Research conducted by Nicolaj Mathies, CEO of Vivo Media, said the promotional campaign for the film on TikTok included 117 posts over a year leading up to its release, an increase from the first film's 108. Messages directly from the cast comprised 24% of the content, with videos featuring Zendaya and Chalamet generating significantly higher viewership. Red carpet content was prioritized to appeal to female audiences, a tactic that contributed to an estimated $2 million increase in the opening box office. According to the marketing research company Fanbox, 57% of TikTok users are female, and hashtags such as #Zendaya have garnered billions of views, leading the core audience for Dune to grow significantly, with a 67.5% increase overall from 2.6 million to 8 million and an 84% increase among superfans. Promotion in Japan also included a collaboration with Mobile Suit Gundam Seed, specifically, their Freedom film. The collaboration featured an alternate version of Dune, Part 2's movie poster featuring Lakis Klein and Kira Yamato in place of Chani and Paul respectively. In January 2024, images of a forthcoming Dune-themed popcorn bucket from AMC theaters went viral and became an internet meme after its sandworm-inspired design was compared to an artificial vagina. Reactions to the bucket received millions of views on the social network TikTok, and jokes about it were featured on US late-night television, including a musical sketch on Saturday Night Live with cast members Marcelo Hernandez, Devin Walker, Bowen Yang, and episode host Ayo Edburai. The extensive online attention paid to the bucket led the media to ask much of Dune, Part 2's main cast for their reactions. Denis Villeneuve said that the bucket was an insane marketing idea that brought a lot of laughter and joy. Griffin Newman in the New York Times chalked up the bucket's appeal to the magic alchemy that results from an object that so many people become perversely fascinated by. The product was one of several popcorn buckets AMC had designed and released alongside recent films, including character heads for Spider-Man, Across the Spider-Verse and burn books for Mean Girls. Over a month after Dune, Part 2's release, AMC's chief content officer stated that we would have never created the bucket knowing it would be celebrated or mocked, but added that they would continue to create collectible popcorn buckets for other films. At that time, the Dune popcorn buckets were being resold for as high as $175. In the wake of this viral popularity, Marvel Studios announced a bucket of their own for the film Deadpool and Wolverine. Lead actor Ryan Reynolds claimed to have had a hand in its design, and producer Kevin Feige described it as intentionally crude and lewd. However, Villeneuve said that these buckets did not favorably compare to Dune's Dune. Part 2 was originally scheduled to be released on October 20, 2023 but was delayed to November 17, 2023, before moving forward 2 weeks to November 3, 2023, to adjust to changes in release schedules from other studios. It was later postponed by over 4 months to March 15, 2024, due to the 2023 Hollywood labor disputes. After the strikes were resolved, the film moved once more up 2 weeks to March 1, 2024. Following the success of Oppenheimer, 2023, in the format, Dune, Part 2 was released in the IMAX 15 perforation 70mm format to 12 venues worldwide, and in standard 5 perforation 70mm format to 38 venues worldwide. Dune, Part 2's world premiere was hosted at the Auditorio Nacional in Mexico City on February 6, 2024. Another premiere was held at the Odeon Lux Leicester Square in London on February 15. On January 16, 2024, the film was shown to a dying man in a palliative care home in the Canadian city of Saguenay, in Denis Villeneuve's native province of Quebec. The man had expressed a wish to see Dune, Part 2 before his death. José Gagnon, the co-founder of a company aiming to accompany people at the end of life, relayed his wish to Villeneuve and Tanya Lapointe, his partner and one of the film's producers, through a viral call-out on Facebook. According to Gagnon, Villeneuve and Lapointe were very touched. The pair initially offered to invite the man to see Dune, Part 2 in Los Angeles or Montreal, but since he was too weak to travel, Villeneuve eventually decided to send one of his assistants directly to Saguenay with his private laptop. The film was screened in a room of the care facility, where everyone was required to hand in their cell phones and sign waivers. The man was in too much pain to watch the entire film and stopped halfway through. He eventually died on January 25. This act, which the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation referred to as the actual world premiere of the film, was publicly disclosed after its theatrical release. The film was released digitally on April 16, 2024, and Blu-ray, DVD and Ultra HD Blu-ray on May 14, 2024, by Warner Brothers. Home entertainment. Dune, Part 2 became available to stream on Max on May 21, 2024. It became the second best-selling film in 2024, across all home entertainment formats in the United Kingdom, with 817,000 units, also achieving first place in physical sales with 132,000 disc units worth $2.5 million. Dune, Part 2 grossed $282.7 million in the United States and Canada, and $432.7 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $715 million. The film made over $145 million in IMAX alone. The Hollywood Reporter estimated that the film would break even after grossing around $500 million. Deadline Hollywood calculated the film's net profit as $184.3 million, accounting for production budgets, marketing, talent participations, and other costs, box office grosses, television and streaming, and home media revenues, making Dune, Part 2 the seventh most profitable blockbuster of 2024. In the United States and Canada, the film's advanced ticket sales surpassed those of Oppenheimer, 2023, and it was projected to gross $65 to $80 million from 4,050 theaters in its opening weekend. The film made $32.2 million on its first day, including $12 million from previews on February 25 and 29. IMAX screenings made up $4.5 million, 38%, of the early totals. It went on to debut to $82.50 million, doubling the first film's $41 million opening weekend. IMAX screenings made up $18.5 million, 23%, of the total, a record for a March release. According to Jeff Goldstein, president of domestic distribution at Warner Brothers, it was much higher than any of us could predict, especially for a genre that is a hard nut to crack. In its second weekend the film made $46.2 million, a 44% drop, finishing second behind newcomer Kung Fu Panda 4. It also surpassed the entire domestic gross of the first film, $108 million, in just 7 days. The film made $28.5 million in its third weekend and $17.6 million in its fourth, remaining in second both times. It also became Timothée Chalamet's highest-grossing film in a leading role, surpassing Wonka, 2023. Dune, Part 2 ended its box office run as the seventh highest-grossing film of 2024 in the US and Canada. Outside the US and Canada, the film was expected to gross $85 to $90 million from 71 markets in its opening weekend. It grossed $100.02 million in the first 3 days. In its second weekend, the sci-fi epic added $81 million from 72 international markets, including a $20 million opening in China. Dune, Part 2 continued to hold well, grossing $51.2 million and $30.7 million in its third and fourth weekends respectively. As of April 14, 2024, the highest grossing markets were the United Kingdom, $48.1 million, China, $48.1 million, France, $41.8 million, Germany, $38.7 million, and Australia, $22 million. The film largely received rave reviews from critics, and was praised for its visual effects and cast performances. Some reviews considered it one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 92% of 466 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 8.4/10. The website's consensus reads, "Visually thrilling and narratively epic, Dune, Part 2 continues Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of the beloved sci-fi series in spectacular form." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 79 out of 100, based on 62 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale, up from the first film's A, while those polled by PostTrack gave it a 94% overall positive score, with 80% saying they would definitely recommend it. Richard Roper, writing for the Chicago Sun-Times, gave the film 3 stars out of 4, praising the technical and narrative aspects, writing, "Even as we marvel at the stunning and immersive and Oscar-level cinematography, editing, score, visual effects, production design and sound in Denis Villeneuve's Dune, Part 2, we're reminded at every turn that this is an absolutely bat bleep sick crazy story." Filmmaker Steven Spielberg praised the film, calling it one of the most brilliant science fiction films I have ever seen, while further noting that it's also filled with deeply drawn characters. Yet the dialogue is very sparse when you look at it proportionately to the running time of the film. It's such cinema. The shots are so painterly, yet there's not an angle or single setup that's pretentious. Filmmaker James Cameron also praised the film, calling it pure cinema and noting it as an improvement over the 1984 adaptation. Filmmaker Christopher Nolan also praised the film, calling it miraculous and saying, "If, to me, Dune was like Star Wars, then Dune 2 is The Empire Strikes Back." Other filmmakers, including Edward Berger, Francis Ford Coppola, Adam Elliott, Jeff Fowler, Reynaldo Marcus Green, Luca Guadagnino, David Lowery, Nicola Stoller, and Jintz Silbalades cited it as among their favorite films of 2024. In June 2025, IndieWire ranked the film at number 95 on its list of the 100 best movies of the 2020s, so far. Other reviews were more mixed. In The Hollywood Reporter, Lovia Gyarki praised the film's technical aspects and performances, but found it failed to fully adapt the book's nuance on themes such as imperialism. Nicholas Barber wrote for the BBC that the film is one of the most jaw-droppingly weird pieces of art house psychedelia ever to come from a major studio, finding the film's grand scale made up for its issues. At the more negative end, Noah Berlatsky, writing for CNN, judged that the film had failed to present an effective anti-colonial vision by still being centered around Paul's destiny despite an increased voice of opposition from Chani. Some commentators have criticized the film for failing to adequately deal with the original book's Middle East and North Africa, MENA, influences or otherwise incorporate enough representation from the region. Furva Shah, writing for the UK edition of Cosmopolitan, said she felt frustrated as a Muslim viewer, criticizing the film for a lack of MENA casting among the leads despite the use of the region's culture and superficial use of Islam. The New Arab's Hannah Flint also criticized the use of Arab and Islamic cultural items and lack of MENA casting, though did praise that of Swiss-Tunisian actress Suhaila Yacoub as a win for Arab representation. Stephen D. Greydanus, in U.S. Catholic, gives a contrasting view of the film's religious inspirations, noting that the film draws from a number of Abrahamic religions for the purpose of critiquing faith itself, while also noting the spiritualization of ecological concerns through the Fremen and suggesting that Catholic viewers may find implicit pro-life resonance through the development of Jessica's unborn daughter as a real character. Villeneuve has expressed interest in making a third film based on Dune Messiah, the second novel in the series, noting that the possibility for the film depended on the success of Dune, Part 2. Spate stated in March 2022 that Villeneuve had plans for a third film as well as the television spin-off series Dune, Prophecy. In August 2023, Villeneuve said the third film would serve as the conclusion of a trilogy. He began developing a script in 2023. In February 2024, Villeneuve said the script was almost finished but he did not want to rush it, citing Hollywood's tendency of focusing on release dates over a film's overall quality. "I want to make sure that if we go back there a third time I want it to be good and I want it to be even better than Part 2. Villeneuve also considered waiting a few years for Chalamet to grow older, given that Dune Messiah is set 12 years after the events of the original novel. Ahead of Dune, Part 2's release, Zimmer revealed he was already writing music for a third film after Villeneuve came in and wordlessly put a copy of Dune Messiah on his desk. In April 2024, it was reported that Villeneuve and Legendary had officially begun development on the third film. Villeneuve has said that Messiah would be his final Dune film, and said in September 2024, "It would be a good idea for me to make sure that, in Messiah, there are the seeds in the project if someone wants to do something else afterwards, because they are beautiful books. They are more difficult to adapt. They become more and more esoteric. It's a bit more tricky to adapt, but I'm not closing the door. I will not do it myself, but it could happen with someone else." Filming on the sequel began in summer 2025 with a scheduled release on December 18, 2026. According to Deadline Hollywood, Nico Wolf Momoa and Ida Brooke were cast as Leto II Atreides and Ghanima Atreides. 19 It wasn't always so for the young Duke. As documented in 2021's Dune, now retitled Dune, Part 1, Paul was once heir apparent to the great galactic house of Atreides. His home planet of Caledon was a lush and watery world. But when the Emperor asked Paul's father, Duke Leto Atreides, to take over the Arrakis and its all-important spice mines, Leto shipped his family, his household, and his private army to the desert planet. But the move was a ruse. The Emperor planned to betray Leto, and he encouraged House Harkonnen, the Atreides' centuries-old rival, to retake Arrakis with Imperial help and extinguish every last vestige of the troublesome House Atreides forever. Indeed, the Emperor and the vile Baron Harkonnen nearly succeeded in doing just that, killing Leto and countless others. But Paul and his mother, Jessica, escaped and fell in with a band of Fremen, the desert people indigenous to Arrakis. But as we learn quickly at the outset of Dune, Part 2, Paul and Jessica's safety isn't guaranteed. Granted, Stilgar, the leader of this small band, is convinced that Paul and Jessica can help in the fight against the invaders from House Harkonnen. More than that, he suspects that Paul just might be the Messiah prophesied by generations of Fremen. But to the rest of the Fremen, Paul and Jessica are simply outsiders barely worth the water they hold in their bodies. Better to let the desert claim them both and be done with it. Paul's not ready to be cast out so quickly, though. He believes he can help these people. And he believes that they can help him, to help him claim vengeance on Baron Harkonnen, the Emperor, and all those who betrayed his father. And Jessica? Her sights are set even higher. Jessica wants to convince the Fremen that her son is indeed their long-awaited Messiah. Why? Because she hopes she knows that Paul's the fulfillment of another set of prophecies and plans. He is the Kwisatz Haderach and, as such, he's destined to usher in a new galactic age. Dune, Part 2 is filled with plots and schemes, politics and betrayals. While some might argue that Arrakeen spice is what makes the galaxy go round, cynicism may be its more powerful engine. But within this Machiavellian mix, we can still find some instincts worth applauding. We begin with Paul and his genuine love for Chani, his firm friend and, ultimately, lover. The two care deeply for each other. Chani teaches Paul some tricks of the Firmin way, and each saves the other's life at least once. Chani supports Paul during some difficult trials. And when Paul tells Chani that he'll love her as long as he draws breath, we know that he means it. Their shared struggle against House Harkonnen also feels like a righteous cause. Not only are the Firmin fighting for their freedom and right to self-determination, but they're battling against what would seem to be a truly evil, sadistic house. There's an undeniable attraction to the Firmin way of life as well, finding beauty in this desolate land and honor in their hardscrabble existence. In God Emperor of Dune, the fourth book in Frank Herbert's original Dune saga, the spiritual leader Muad'Dib is quoted as saying, "The problem of leadership is inevitably, who will play God?" We learned in Dune, Part 1 that two separate messianic prophecies potentially rest on Paul's shoulders. By the first movie's end, a few Firmin already suspect Paul of being the Lisan al-Gaib, or the voice from the outer world, whom the faithful believe will lead them to paradise. But that prophecy was very much a human creation, one crafted by the shadowy order of the Bene Gesserit, of which Paul's mother, Jessica, is a member. For ages, the Bene Gesserit, whom some call witches, and whose most powerful members are called Reverend Mothers, have done their best to pull the strings of galactic intrigue, often doing so by creating myths on receptive planets. The Order found Arrakis a particularly receptive environment for Bene Gesserit missionaries, Jessica tells us in Part 2, because nothing can live there without faith. That's particularly true in the south, an environment so hostile to life that many believe it to be uninhabited. But the Firmin live there by the millions, and most of them are fundamentalists, as they're sometimes derisively referred to by the generally more secular northern-dwelling Firmin. As noted in Adam Holtz's review of Dune, Part 1, the Firmin can superficially resemble Muslims, but we don't know much about their faith beyond their belief in the prophecies surrounding the Lisan al-Gaib. As Paul's victories against the Harkonnen increase, and as he further wraps himself in every aspect of the Firmin way of life, more and more people come to believe that Paul is, indeed, their prophesied savior. Paul sadly tells someone, the Firmin used to be friends. Now they're followers. Paul knows full well that the Bene Gesserit are responsible for these prophecies, and he's upset with his mother for her own role in spreading rumors of his quasi-divinity. "It's no prophecy," he tells her. "It's a story you keep telling." Early in the movie, he even does his best to even undercut those prophecies. For most of the movie, he pushes away the mantle of Messiah, an expression of humility that, for some, paradoxically proves that he is the Messiah. "I don't care what you believe," one Firmin leader tells Paul. "I believe." Meanwhile, the Bene Gesserit have their own quasi-prophecy of sorts, that of the previously mentioned Kwisatz Haderach, a male Bene Gesserit who would be able to look into the Order's distant past and foretell the future. But rather than turning to a divine being to produce such a thing, the Bene Gesserit took matters into their own hands and embarked on a breeding program, a program that would run for 10,000 years. Paul, Jessica believes, is the Kwisatz Haderach, even if other members of the Order believe this at least at first to be heresy. And again, he seems to fulfill the Haderach checklist. But others of the Order say that there are other contenders, too. Another note about the Bene Gesserit here, they feel like a religious order, though they don't seem to worship anything but power. Their ability to control people through their voices smacks of powerful magic, and the Order is saturated with rituals and mysticism designed, perhaps, to awe those they come in contact with. And while their rituals differ from place to place, we're told, an important ritual on Arrakis is the imbibing of the water of life. It's poisonous stuff, but aspirants to become the planet's Reverend Mother must quaff the liquid, which gives them the memories of every Reverend Mother that came before. Jessica undergoes the ceremony, turning her unborn baby into an embryonic Reverend Mother who speaks to both Jessica and Paul when she has something to say. Spoiler warning: while Paul does his best to avoid any messianic entanglements, he eventually realizes that he must drink the water of life himself, even though it's supposed to be certain death for any man who'd attempt it. Indeed, he nearly dies, but is, for all intents, brought back to life by a tear from his girlfriend Chani, another Firmin prophecy fulfilled. Paul still doesn't believe in his divinity, but he purposefully embraces the mantle of Lisan al-Gaib, presenting himself as an all-knowing God King and purposefully inspiring both awe and fear in his followers. We hear that water, particularly the water gathered from fallen Firmin, is sacred, and the people have built cisterns filled with that water that a Firmin would never touch, even if dying from thirst. Jessica, after becoming Reverend Mother on Arrakis, has presumably sacred words tattooed on her face. We hear rumblings of an upcoming jihad. A Firmin leader warns Paul to be aware of jinn. They are demons, he says, adding that he's joking, then adding that he's not. As mentioned, Paul and Chani ultimately begin a romantic relationship, they kiss at times, and we see them in bed together a couple of times, once while they're in deeply intimate contact. We don't see or hear anything critical, outside bared shoulders. The vibe is more romantic than tawdry. But it's obvious where the moment is heading. Paul proclaims his lifelong love to her a couple of times, and he seems to mean it. But in this galaxy, sex and marriage are often political tools. A Bene Gesserit seduces a member of House Harkonnen in order to get pregnant with the guy's baby, as directed by her own Reverend Mother. We hear how Jessica was also ordered to only bear a girl to her lover, Baron Leto Atreides, but she bucked her orders and bore him Paul instead. The betrothal of the Emperor's daughter is treated as something of a political chess piece, with not even the pretense of her suitor asking for her hand out of love. House Harkonnen seems built on sadism. All of its highest-ranking members display it. Baron Harkonnen, the grotesquely obese leader of the house, kills 2 women behind closed doors in a fit of pique. We hear the screams from the outside. Beast Rabban, nephew of the Baron, displayed rabid cruelty to the Firmin when the Baron gave him control of Arrakis, and when things go poorly, we see him repeatedly smash the head of one of his helpmates into a display counter. The Baron's younger nephew, Phaedra, is less bestial but no less bloodthirsty, slicing throats with no provocation and employing even crueler methods to bring the Firmin to heel. It's worth noting that Fade participates in a gladiatorial-like game as part of his birthday celebration, in which he's given the opportunity to dispatch 3 victims in a gigantic arena filled with chanting, bloodthirsty fans. One of his victims proves to have a little more fight, and an arena official spears the guy with a hook, like bandrillas, used to bleed and weaken bulls in bullfighting, before Fade orders him away. But those moments of cruelty are secondary to what is, essentially, a war movie. We see plenty of people shot, stabbed, sliced, and blown up. Explosions, including nuclear ones, consume many a combatant. We're told that there's a storehouse of atomic weapons big enough to destroy the entire planet. 2 scenes feature piled high corpses being burned. Meanwhile, in the desert, sandworms are constant threats. And while we don't see anyone actually head down a worm's gullet, we certainly can assume that's how many meet their doom. 1 baby sandworm dies at someone's hands, though, 2 drowned in a small, ceremonial pool of water. Blasts destroy various structures. A 2-person fight involves bloodletting on both sides, though only 1 person dies. Paul has visions of what will happen if he does take up the mantle of Firmin Messiah, and it's not pretty. He sees millions of Firmin apparently starving to death, images that we get a glimpse of, too. We see a corpse ceremonially sucked dry of water. The spice known as melange is, essentially, a drug, albeit a useful one. It's an integral part of space travel. Guild navigators use it, the books tell us, to fold space. And for some, it allows visions of the future. You can tell a habitual user by his or her eerily blue eyes, which all of the Firmin have. Jessica, suffering from morning sickness, struggles not to vomit as a Firmin leader tells her to keep it, and the precious liquid it contains, inside. Later, a Harkonnen soldier vomits much more grotesquely. Beast Rabban repeatedly refers to the Firmin as rats. We see and hear about plenty of betrayals and underhanded political maneuvers, some of which involve the wholesale slaughter of thousands, if not millions. Baron Harkonnen is grotesquely obese enough that he requires an anti-gravitational suit to get about. Frank Herbert's Dune is not an easy book to bring to the big screen. One look at the 1984 version to tell you as much. In terms of its scope, Dune feels like a more cynical, more political version of Lord of the Rings, though obviously with more sand, drugs, and 1,000-foot worms. Dune, retroactively titled Dune, Part 1, was nominated for 10 Oscars and won 6. In my opinion, Part 2 is better, at least in terms of pure aesthetics. The scope is necessarily grand. The imagery is stunning. A sequence in the climactic battle feels on par with the March of the Oliphaunts in Jackson's Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, which, incidentally, took home Best Picture honors that year. And while I'm pretty sure that folks not familiar with Dune, and certainly those who haven't seen Part 1, will be metaphorically lost in the desert, this nearly 3-hour movie walks us through as coherently as it can. Good movie? For fans of sci-fi and this franchise, yes. Good for you and / or your family? Well, that's another question. Part 2's stunning, soaring images come with another edge to the blade. The destruction can feel horrific, grittier and more real feeling than your average superhero flick, for sure. And unlike Lord of the Rings, good and evil here are more ambiguous. To be sure, we know who we're rooting for. But Paul himself knows that in pursuing what he sees as the greater good, he's going to have to do an awful lot of bad. The movie emphasizes that sense of moral compromise at the heart of the story and the tragic costs involved. As if to underline the point, we see a scene early on where the Harkonnens burn the bodies of their enemies after claiming Arrakis as their own. Much later, Fremen forces do the same, a tragic echo. And then there's the movie's spirituality. On one hand, it gives us a flawed prophet in Paul Atreides, a messianic figure much different from Christianity's own real Messiah. On the other, the story may plant seeds of doubt in religion itself, suggesting that faith just might be a very human ploy to manipulate the masses. Neither necessarily undercuts our own Christian faith, of course, and the spiritual themes here can be fantastic springboards to conversation. But for those of a certain spiritual bent, these messages can be stumbling blocks, as well. Yes, Dune, Part 2 is a well-crafted film, and I don't expect to see its equal, in terms of spectacle, for the rest of the year. But its beauty, like the planet Arrakis itself, holds other elements underneath its cinematic sands. Denis Villeneuve has made something extraordinary with Dune, Part 2 and its predecessor. Adapting the 1965 novel to the screen, Villeneuve turns Frank Herbert's ideas and characters into visionary cinema. Beyond tapping into the source material's vast potential for emotion and socio-political commentary, which he does with a careful hand and sharp detail, the director of Arrival, 2016, and Blade Runner 2049, 2017, applies a formal bravado and seriousness found in history's most substantial works of science fiction. To say the filmmaker made good on the promise of the first part from 2021 is an understatement. Both films are exceptional in their own ways, but they become something altogether more when considered together among the most satisfying and accomplished science fiction series in recent memory. Not only do they supply an epic-sized spectacle with action and awing sights, but they also remark on political occupation, genocide, the battle for natural resources, and religion as a means of control. While it could have been a typical retread of Star Wars in a lesser director's hands, Villeneuve's version takes a galactic view to consider the broader implications. It's less about rooting for a hero than watching an elaborate strategy unfold. Dune, Part 2 is rich with emotion, intellect, and cinematic ambition, delivering at heights few Hollywood productions have achieved. On a personal level, I breathed a sigh of relief after the final frame. I've admired Herbert's book since my teens and have never had faith that any screen adaptation could do the material justice. Look at the precedents: David Lynch's 1984 feature boasted some incredible imagery and a worthy cast. However, between the director's loss of creative control and admitted distance from the material, Lynch's version doesn't click. The Sci-Fi Channel miniseries from 2000 has other problems, ranging from its lack of faithfulness to the book to its underwhelming production values. Not even Alejandro Jodorowsky's unmade version of Dune, detailed in the 2013 documentary, sounded inspiring, since the filmmaker seemed more interested in extravagances than Herbert's themes. Still, when Villeneuve's first part was released in 2021, the sequel had not yet been greenlit. I approached with perhaps too much caution, not wanting to invest myself or build expectations should the sequel go unmade or not stick the landing. Watching the second half, all of my concerns faded away, and I found myself immersed in Herbert's world again, seeing moments from the book on screen just as my mind's eye had seen them as a reader. That's just one aspect of Villeneuve's genius, his ability to conjure images from the text and visualize what Herbert wrote. And similar to Herbert's book, Villeneuve's version considers the transfer of power from an almost critical distance. Although it's tempting to view Paul Atreides, Timothée Chalamet, excellent, the Messiah of the Fremen desert people, through the lens of the traditional hero's journey, the monomyth narrative pattern written about in Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces, 1949, it's perhaps more rewarding to view the events with a Bene Gesserit perspective. In other words, not from the subjective perspective of Paul's rise to power and fulfillment of prophecy, becoming what the so-called witches deem the Kwisatz Haderach or Muad'Dib as the Fremen know him. Paul goes by many names and titles, but his rebellion on Arrakis and the subsequent seizing of the Emperor's throne feel like chess moves in a larger game. The screenplay by Villeneuve and John Spates considers a long line of maneuvers, so while the audience hopes for Paul to rise, there's an underlying sense that he is less a hero than another ruler, exploiter, and political force using religion as a means to acquire power. Yet, the affecting and ultimately judgmental eye of his lover, Chani, Zendaya, earns the most sympathy. Still, as Charlotte Rampling's truth-sayer observes, there are no sides. If not already apparent, it's best to watch the 2021 film before Part 2 and catch up on the elaborate mythology. There's no recap or previously on summary here, the sequel picks up where the first part ended. After his family, House Atreides, falls to the biomechanical House Harkonnen, the returning brood custodians of Arrakis, Paul joins the Fremen to earn the desert people's loyalty. Paul has slain a Fremen warrior to prove himself, buying time for him and his Bene Gesserit mother, Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson. Among the Fremen, Stilgar, Javier Bardem, and many others believe Paul is the one, the Lisan al-Gaib, or off-world prophet. Others have their doubts. But Jessica, pregnant with a baby who communicates with her telepathically, sets out to become the Reverend Mother of the Fremen, a process that requires her to drink poison yet imbues her with all the memories of her forebears. By acquiring this position, she hopes to convince them that her son is their promised Messiah, who will return the trees and liberate the arid planet. Paul gradually fulfills one prophecy after another, survives trial after perilous trial, amasses a deadly arsenal, and converts dissenters to followers. Among them is Chani, who comes to respect Paul and becomes his lover. However, Chani isn't quite prepared for how Paul intends to seize power and get revenge on the Emperor of the known universe, Christopher Walken, by disrupting the Harkonnen's spice mining operations, inciting a holy war among the Empire's many houses, and ascending in the chaos. All of this fuss is over spice, the speckled fragments in the desert that, when used as a psychotropic, opens the mind and facilitates space travel, making it the most coveted resource in the universe. Power over spice is power over all, crackles a voice from the void before the Warner Brothers logo, reminding us that the characters in Dune, like those in Game of Thrones, serve as pawns amid power plays. Take the Emperor's daughter, Princess Irulan, Florence Pugh, who, along with her fellow Bene Gesserit, Lady Margot Fenring, Lea Seydoux, and the Truth-Sayer, anticipate the Emperor's fall. But to whom? Paul could prove victorious. Then again, so could the Harkonnen not Glossurabin, Dave Bautista, the Barons, Stellan Skarsgård, nephew who has lost control of Arrakis to Paul's Fremen rebellion. It's more likely the Baron's other nephew, Phaedrot Ha, Austin Butler, convincingly replicating Skarsgård's accent. Lady Margot moves the Phaedrot Ha piece into place despite believing him psychotic, which he is, and ensures his bloodline should he prove victorious against Paul. While the Dune saga might play like a space opera at times, with pregnancies and revelations about Paul and Jessica's true bloodline, Villeneuve embraces Herbert's themes about religion as an exploitable belief system to serve political gain. The book and film draw from humanity's historical struggles over resources such as oil and land, with parallels between Paul's adoption of the Fremen's ways and T.E. Lawrence's immersion into the Arab rebellion during the First World War. Villeneuve has announced his desire to adapt Herbert's second novel in the series, Dune Messiah, which continues the trend of watching vast political and religious regimes rise and fall. Such themes have made the book an enduring text for scholarly analysis, illustrating how politics adopt religious concepts to secure control, notions all too familiar in a country where Christian nationalism has become a platform for certain leaders. However, with the Fremen, the themes in Dune reach even further into social foundations built on the concept of personal discipline for the community good, which Herbert drew from Islamic values. Through that lens, Paul becomes less a hero than a warning about chosen ones who buy into their own savior myth. This is all to say that Dune is a multifaceted work brimming with ideas. With a few exceptions, Villeneuve and Spates have adapted the material with faithfulness in mind. If only to maintain a commercially viable PG-13 rating, scenes of Baron Harkonnen and Phaedrot Ha's predatory sexual behavior have been omitted from the page-to-screen translation, robbing the characters of a particularly nasty detail to their monstrosity. But in most other instances, the filmmakers have preserved the tone and spirit of Herbert's text. To be sure, Villeneuve finds inspired ways of realizing facets of the story, such as Paul's haunted dreams of millions dying under his reign and the elegant depiction of gravity-less Harkonnen gliding up a rock face or dropping from an aircraft. Shots from inside of Jessica's womb of the unborn Alia, who talks to her mother and has an uncanny knowledge of everything happening, recall the all-seeing view of the Star Child from Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968, and they have an analogous metaphysical quality to them. But even with imagery such as Alia in the womb drawing from the Star Child, Villeneuve's filmmaking doesn't feel like anyone else's, which is a rarity among today's directors. Villeneuve isn't making a pastiche or compendium of allusions to other films, rather, he carves out something singular with Dune and its sequel, adding to his already impressive work in science fiction. On a purely technical level, Part 2 is astounding. Production designer Patrice Vermette and costumer Jacqueline West return from Dune, creating spaces and outfits that look wholly original. At the same time, cinematographer Greg Fraser balances scopic, severe sequences with more spontaneous interpersonal moments. And while CGI accomplishes much of Villeneuve's vision, there's not an oppressive computerized quality to everything on screen, unlike most contemporary blockbusters. Even when the enormous sandworms arrive on screen, their mouths vaguely resembling the human eye. Villeneuve shot many of the exteriors in Abu Dhabi and Jordan, but other sequences rely on CGI. A black and white sequence under the black sun of Jidi Prime, the Harkonnen home planet, delivers a convincing arena with special effects. Not even Hans Zimmer's music reverberating through the viewer's chest feels like the typical Hollywood score. It's otherworldly and hypnotic, yet it supports the thrilling aspects of the story with guitar riffs. Most of these technical areas earned the 2021 film its 6 Oscar wins, and the sequel deserves the same attention. It's also worth noting how the stellar cast, one of the most stacked ensembles in recent film history, disappears into their roles effortlessly, thanks to the strength of Villeneuve's storytelling. Dune, Part 2 further proves that a popcorn-munching, $150 million plus production doesn't need to be mindless entertainment, rather, it can be cerebral, passionate, and challenging. Villeneuve already proved as much with Dune, not to mention Arrival and Blade Runner 2049. He doubles down with the sequel, which may shock viewers who expect to follow Paul on a heroic rise to power. The audience may root for Paul at the moment because the Harkonnen look like an awful alternative. But is Paul any better? Through Chani's eyes, who knows Paul's doubts and strategy more intimately than anyone, except perhaps Jessica, she sees the opportunism and scheming by the proposed leader, who so shrewdly chose the name Muad'Dib after a spry kangaroo mouse that can make its own water. But Chani sees through all that. You want to control people? Tell them a Messiah will come. They'll wait for centuries, she tells him early on. The Bene Gesserit know this to be true, so does Paul, yet he cannot help but follow the path laid out for him. As I grappled with these ideas after the sequel, I must acknowledge my complete immersion into the film's world. I was engaged on every level. Fitting, for what must be one of the greatest science fiction epics of all time. Dune was first published as serials, starting in 1963. 60 years later it sits within an uncomfortable franchise. Frank Herbert wrote 5 sequels before his death in 1986, an encyclopedia whose canonicity was imperfect even at the time. Easy enough to consider that a road not traveled, like Alan Dean Foster's Splinter of the Mind's Eye, a sequel to Star Wars, 1977, published in 1978. Easier still to look at the 19 novels published by Herbert's son Brian in the last 20 years, co-written with Kevin J. Anderson, whose bibliography is as rich with recognizable franchises as Foster's, though the proportions of novelizations to spin-offs is almost inverted. All this talk of writing is in part an introduction to a parting of the ways. There are 2 Dunes, the film itself and the adaptation. 2 Dunes, this a part 2 of Denis Villeneuve's interpretation. At least the third feature-filmed attempt, past failures by Jodorowsky and Lynch, other roads not traveled. I say past failures because I was withholding judgment on this Dune as a project when I reviewed the first part, and having seen the second it is not favorable. That's of 2 minds, however. If, like me, you've read, and reread, the book, there is another review for you. Beware though that it is rife with what might constitute spoilers if you have not pored over those pages previously. Here I hope to discuss Dune, Part 2 as a film, sequel to another film. It is not an easy task, and I apologize if echoes of the book creep in. I'll start with one of those gifts of prophecy, an ending foreseen. I do not think that Part 2 represents a successful conclusion. Before we see anything we hear, chanting against the blackness. Sardaukar. Harkonnen. Fremen. Whose battle hymn? It matters not. It is the sound of war, and after the logos of various combines mercantile it will be burning bodies. That's the closest you will get to seeing what has gone before. Part 2 assumes you have done your homework, that you are a returner. If a funeral pyre is a guiding light, it is one that does not, cannot, attempt to hold your hand. It will tell you that power over spice is power over all, but there are other sources of power. Word and deed. Sound and vision. Remember that James was dead, to begin with. Paul Atreides, Timothée Chalamet, will gain other names here, Muad'Dib, the Lisan al-Gaib, but how he is called is not his calling. His visions, as huge upon the screen as the sand, are of burning, starving, unleashing. His solace the Fremen Chani, Zendaya, the actions of his mother Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, those of an ally with complicated history. The Bene Gesserit have found a deep state of being within the Empire, they have the ear of Shaddam IV, Christopher Walken, and the whole of Princess Irulan, Florence Pugh. Their workings may be behind veils and closed doors, but their influence on history is written on more sheets than paper. Villeneuve again co-writes with John Spates, Prometheus, 2017's The Mummy, and while as a sequel to a novel is a doubly adapted screenplay by Academy rules, there are doublings everywhere. Most frustratingly an echo of something unique to their Dune, the sense of a matadorial relation to prophecy. Due to accidents of release dates, audiences will not have a choice between films with long publishing legacies involving weird powers and fortune-telling foes that underserve their female characters, but Madame Web has even less to commend it. Dune at least looks, sounds, amazing, though not always. Sequences of storms recall the brazen imagination of Mad Max upon the Fury Road, but what's been done before in hallucinatory hues and black and chrome is just done here. The leering sandworms are connected to the spice that lights the way, but their lamprey likeness does not convince when written. There are echoes of other attempts, aftershocks, and tremors. In trying to thread these worms just irritate. Huddled on them, the Fremen could be immigrants atop a train, Tankovi on the Eastern Front, but even wrapped in wicker baskets they do not quite succeed at transporting. More lackluster than locomotive, and indicative of how other animals are handled. The matador appeared a few times in Part 1, a statue, a story, a painting, and so on. There's an arena here, capering rodeo clowns drawn by Brahm, not Geiger, and spears to slow them. The redirection of force, the diversionary, and again for me at least a sense that this reading was me reaching. Seeking pattern where there was none, knowing in part that pattern had been removed. I looked for this because I remembered it from the first part, though Paul remembers something differently. The Jamies, Bob's Oluzenmakin, that appears to him might be a jinn, a voice to tempt him as he wanders the wilderness. The religious iconography of a foretold prophet wandering the desert alone is so obvious as to be inescapable. Harder to pin down is the film's own prophesying, what it has told us we will go on to do. In some of this there are different borrowings. An eclipse, a child, and we are brought back and forth to 2001, A Space Odyssey. 5 years after the novel, in 1968. 8,000 years and change before the novel, assuming that the 102nd century of the diaries from the Imperial Palace have the same starting point. Another inescapable conjunction, even if the moons are different, the black monolith a silver sphere, the skull crushed not beneath a lever but a rock. There are moments of visual poetry. Paul lying in state with two worlds on either side of him, the steps of a pool of water and the parallel steps of a pit of sand, an echo of his journey to a place between. There are moments of grandeur, deserts lit by great fires as every last erg of energy is put to use. There are moments of tension, those shields and lift belts a reminder that even if tactics amount to running at each other in mobs, this is still, somehow, the far future. New enemies too. Beneath a blistering sky and fireworks whose wet blossoms recall the heptapod excretions of arrival, we spend time on Gaidi Prime. The Lady Fenring, Lisi Deus, another Bene Gesserit, takes the measure of Fade Radha, Austin Butler, a N.A. Baron who would be king though his lineage as Harkonnen has more than the shade of Elvis. Old friends, of course. Josh Brolin returns as Gurney Halleck. One would think the Atreides followers of Imgarl's four-armed emperor given how many right hands they have. That fondness echoed in Stilgar, Javier Bardem, who does not see the young pup Paul was but the mouse he is fated to be. Fate perhaps the underlying issue. This is not described as an ending, but a part 2. It has one, but one that I did not find satisfying. Not because I had read the book, that is a different feeling, but because I had spent 5¼ hours to get here. I cannot know how much interference behind the scenes shaped what we have here, at least not yet, but Jodorowsky's Dune and David Lynch's would suggest precedent. There was no certainty of a sequel, but with this much invested I am not sure how happy anyone would be with what they get. It might seem that I stamp my feet in petulance, but that is a symptom not of frustration but powerlessness. The word that will likely be used most often to describe Denis Villeneuve's Dune, Part 2 is massive. Expect a whole lot of variations on the words epic and spectacle too. Whatever big words you apply to the result, Villeneuve undeniably did not approach Frank Herbert's beloved sci-fi novel with modest aspirations, and it's his ambition, along with the top tier of behind-the-scenes craftspeople with whom he collaborated, that have paid off in this superior follow-up to the Oscar-winning 2021 film. While that beloved blockbuster often felt like half a film, Dune, Part 2 locates significantly higher stakes on Iraqis, while injecting just enough humor and nuanced themes about power and fanaticism to flavor the old-fashioned storytelling. More than a simple savior or chosen one story, Dune, Part 2 is a robust piece of filmmaking, a reminder that this kind of broad-scale blockbuster can be done with artistry and flair. Dune, Part 2 picks up so closely on the heels of the first film that the Fremen are still transporting the body of James, Bob's Olozinmakin, home again after he was bested in the fight with Paul Atreides, Timothée Chalamet. After the massacre of House Atreides, Paul chose to go with the Fremen, much to the consternation of his mother Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson. Thinking both Paul and Jessica were taken by the desert and all hopped up on violence after destroying the Atreides interlopers, House Harkonnen amplifies its attack on the Fremen, leading to a few remarkably staged battles between the warriors and soldiers. Villeneuve and his team deftly fill the first hour with battle sequences that counter the firepower of the Harkonnen military and the Fremen tribal combatants, who often literally emerge from the earth to destroy them. Bodies fall from the sky as enormous ships burst into flames in a way that feels nearly operatic. Amidst the chaos, Dave Bautista cannily sketches Rabban Harkonnen as a wartime leader who is in way over his bald head, while Stellan Skarsgård leans even harder into a sort of blend between Nosferatu and Jabba the Hutt. As the battle between the Fremen and the Harkonnens for control of Iraqis serves as the backdrop for Dune, Part 2, Paul's arc from nervous young man at the beginning of the first film to potential leader plays out in the foreground. A Fremen tribal leader named Stilgar, Javier Bardem, is convinced that Paul Atreides is the chosen one that has been foretold among his people for generations. Even as so much of the mythology points to Paul's savior role, the emo king tries to blend into the Fremen, forming a relationship with a young warrior named Chani, Zendaya. Paul passes the tests put in front of him by the Fremen, takes on the tribal name of Muad'Dib, and vows vengeance against the Harkonnens who were behind his father's death. On another planet, an emperor named Shaddam IV, Christopher Walken, counsels with his daughter Irulan, Florence Pugh, and a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother, Charlotte Rampling, on the state of Iraqis. It's revealed early on that Shaddam basically sent House Atreides to its destruction, meaning he's on that vengeance list that Paul's been keeping, while Irulan serves as a sort of narrator for Dune, Part 2, dictating some of the political developments into a device that's really designed to keep audiences with the plot. If the interstellar politics aren't enough, writers Villeneuve and John Spates inject a nice dose of religious fanaticism for the inevitable think pieces too. Lady Jessica becomes a powerful religious figure of her own among the Fremen, guiding her son's ascendance in a manner that feels nefarious and unsettling. Dune, Part 2 is not a traditional hero's journey in that it's constantly questioning if being led by an outsider from another culture is the right move. Chani sure doesn't think so, and Zendaya subtly finds notes to make viewers wonder what a happy ending would be for these characters. As Jessica and Paul learn more about Fremen history and culture, they threaten not to lead it as much as dismantle and own it. There's a big difference. While the plotting in Part 2 is undeniably richer than the first film, its greatest assets are once again on a craft level. Greig Fraser, who won the Oscar for cinematography the first time, tops his work there with stunning use of color and light. It's in the manner the sun hits Chalamet's face at a certain angle or the wildly different palettes that differentiate the Harkonnens and the Fremen. The browns and blues of the desert culture don't feel arid as much as grounded and tactile, while the Harkonnen world is so devoid of color that it's often literally black and white. Even what look like fireworks pop like someone throwing colorless paint at a wall. Hans Zimmer's Oscar-winning score felt a bit overdone to me in the first film, but he smartly differentiates the cultures here, finding more metallic sounds for the cold Harkonnens to balance against the heated score for the Fremen. Finally, the effects and sound design feel denser this time, and the fight choreography reminds one how poorly this has been done in other blockbuster films. As for performers, Chalamet is likely to be the most divisive element, often feeling a bit flat for someone believed to be the Neo of this world. However, those choices add up in a way that makes thematic sense, enhancing the uncertainty of Paul's rise. Zendaya is solid, although she lacks chemistry with Chalamet that would have helped, but it's Ferguson's slippery performance and Bardem's playful one that really add flavors here that weren't in the first outing. Finally, Austin Butler leans hard into the exaggerated role of Phaedra, playing the sociopathic nephew of the Baron with all the scenery-chewing intensity that a character like this needs to work, finding the emotional void to balance out against Chalamet's tempestuous inner monologue. Dune, Part 2 has been compared to The Empire Strikes Back in the run-up to its release, and that's not quite right. The better comparison is The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, another film that built on what we knew about the characters from the first film, added a few new ones, and really amplified a sense of continuous battle and danger. Like both films, a third chapter feels inevitable. Critics will have to come up with a new synonym for massive. I am pleased to report that Dune 2 was truly everything it promised it would be and more. It was cinematic grandeur in every way possible. The raw emotion each scene carried was literally palpable, transporting viewers into the worlds of the movie. Character and story development was also masterfully awesome and stayed true to the book. This movie leans in heavily on the human emotions of duty, loss, hope, love and revenge. Nothing, however, prepared me for the scene with young Paul Yuzul Atreides at the center of the war council in the south of Arrakis. He instantly transformed before my very eyes from a meek, humble outsider, into a most revered, powerful, and visionary leader, the Mu'addib. His body posture, confidence, tonality, command, and presence was truly electrifying. He embodied the figure of Lisan al-Gaib which the Fremen leader, Stilgar, had hoped in, finally justifying his long-held faith in Paul. I also enjoyed the scene where Paul Atreides was reunited with his old teacher, Gurney of House Atreides. It has been 3 weeks since I saw Dune Part 2 for the first time, and since, I've been struggling to find the words to convey my love for it. Now, after having seen it for an additional 2 times, I can say with confidence that Villeneuve's sci-fi epic is among some of the greatest sequels that I've ever seen. In Dune Part 1, we left off with Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, and Paul, Timothée Chalamet, integrating into the Fremen society on Arrakis after a one-on-one battle with Jamies, a strong Fremen fighter, propelled Paul into Mahdi territory. Though everyone isn't quite a believer in Paul Atreides being the acclaimed Messiah, especially Chani, Zendaya, Stilgar, Javier Bardem, stands firm on his certainty that Paul will indeed lead them to paradise. Director Denis Villeneuve reliably plays no games in setting up the exciting story that is Dune Part 2. A continuation of the Messiah versus false prophecy theme, the storytelling in this sci-fi epic is an ethereal delight. Picking up where we left off in Part 1, Lady Jessica and Paul, now House Atreides refugees, are standing with the Fremen to survive the Harkonnens' vicious attacks to source spice and restore the production of it to full capacity. As more soldiers traverse the sands of Arrakis, looking for victims to eliminate, Paul gets an opportunity to learn the Fremen ways and help them stand up to their longtime bullies. Villeneuve plays this card well, nicely building up the savior trope that will inevitably fall onto Paul. And with each directional decision that guides us along each perspective, he seizes the opportunity to let his viewers make up our own minds regarding Paul's journey. One of my favorite aspects of Dune Part 2 is Villeneuve's magnificent visual storytelling. He uses the magic of the dunes to influence his framing, creating adrenaline-induced sequences that had me on the edge of my seat. The result is a joyous spectacle that is equally daunting and exhilarating as his camera navigates political and religious themes through a simple frame. As the story progresses, more examples are revealed to influence the coming of the prophecy and the Fremen's reaction towards that. It's simple in concept, but Javier Bardem's performance leads the way in convincing us that Paul is indeed worthy of his Lisan al-Gaib moniker. Whether or not it's the truth is never the point, which makes Stilgar's stance all the more intriguing. His beliefs are so strong that it actually dictates his next moves, drawing them closer to the prophecy. Funny enough, Villeneuve masterfully deconstructs religious followership through these characters with such a shrewdly obvious approach. Yet, the emotional journey experienced by these believers are capable of penetrating your heart, one way or another. I may be stating the obvious, but Dune Part 2 feels like a masterclass in a plethora of categories like directing, cinematography, and especially acting. I haven't been strongly convinced by a performance in a long time until Bartam Stilgar. The way he made me believe in Paul is truly an exceptional showcase of dedication and commitment. For so long, I've also been waiting for Chalamet to show me his complete star potential. Truth be told, I had never walked away from a performance of his and considered him to be a good actor. But in front of Villeneuve's lens, consider me a full believer and an official fan. By now, there's no convincing needed to see Dune Part 2. The ravings from critics and fans alike tell us everything we need to know. Villeneuve's Dune follow-up provides a masterclass in storytelling, acting, and directing. But I would be remiss to not mention the sensational sound design and score. For me, they are the finishing touches of this epic to classify it as blockbuster and sci-fi movie magic. All the emotions I felt, from wonder and excitement to skepticism and uneasiness, can be credited to the piercing sounds that took me on these emotional journeys. And if there's one thing I'm now fully convinced on, it's that Denis Villeneuve could, and should, take the horror genre by storm. His work in Dune Part 2 feels natural and translatable to the genre. What he was able to accomplish in a few moments to exemplify atmospheres of fear and anguish is better than what some horror film directors manage to do in their entire films. A monstrous achievement for the sci-fi genre, Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 is all guts and glory with an end result that feels like sanctified storytelling. The film balances politics and religion through a simplistic lens while managing to fully entertain by weaving in chilling action sequences that are cheer-worthy. It's movie magic personified. And thanks to a glorious third act capable of sending any movie lover into electrifying enthusiasm, I'm already prepared to carry that excitement well into Dune Part 3 thanks to a very capable and visionary director. I was highly anticipating Dune in the months leading up to the film's 2021 release. I hadn't read the novel series and knew nothing about it, but I soon learned it was considered one of the best science fiction stories ever. Outside the source material's reputation, there was also the fact that a flood of renowned actors, such as Zendaya, Oscar Isaac, Rebecca Ferguson, Jason Momoa, Josh Brolin and way more, were set to star. And set to lead them all was Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides, the franchise's main character. But I'll be honest, my first time watching Dune was a subpar experience. My theater had definitely messed something up in the audio department, because during all the uber important, hushed conversations and secrets exchanged in the film, I kept asking my boyfriend, wait, what did she just say? Because of all the low-tone speaking, I genuinely couldn't hear what they were saying. Pair this up with hearing a bunch of made-up sci-fi jargon and names for the first time, and the film became a little hard to follow. I hate to confess this, but I even fell asleep during some parts. I never do that. The nearly 3-hour runtime also did me no favors. I remember being specifically disappointed at this because I genuinely love sci-fi movies. And, between missing pieces of dialogue and nodding off, this entire experience became haunting as I thought, oh God, I'm turning into my mother. But after that, I watched Dune again when it began streaming on Max. Then, again, when Netflix started streaming it. Then again. Yeah, I've watched it 4 times. Because, what can I say? When I could actually hear the dialogue put together with all the moving parts of the story, the great houses of the Empire, the Bene Gesserit witches and the indigenous Fremen of the desert planet Arrakis, I was very compelled. I still don't think the film is perfect, but I don't think an introduction to a fictional world can be. Laying the foundation of a franchise as immersive as Dune is no easy feat. But still, the acting, practical effects/CGI and storytelling made me come back multiple times. And I suggest fans of the film check it out one more time to best prepare for the cinematic behemoth that is Dune, Part 2. Major spoilers ahead for Part 1, Only minor plot spoilers for Dune, Part 2. The film picks up immediately after the events of its 2021 prequel. Following the overnight massacre of House Atreides at the hands of the Harkonnens, Paul and Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, are the dukedom's sole survivors. But they are not free of danger yet. The unforgiving desert biome of Arrakis is not kind to the weak or unprepared. The Atreides' only hope lies in taking refuge with the Fremen, the planet's indigenous people who are masters of the desert. Luckily for Paul and Jessica, about half of the Fremen are more than willing to accept them, as the universe's Bene Gesserit witches have been planting seeds of faith in Fremen religion for years. One prophecy dictates that a messiah from another world will rescue the Fremen from imperial tyranny and restore their planet to a luscious paradise, and that prophecy just so happens to contain a mother-son duo. However, the other half of the Fremen aren't so quick to welcome them. After all, they are foreigners, and foreigners have brought nothing but pain and suffering to Arrakis. Paul's closest friends, Chani, Zendaya, and Stilgar, Javier Bardem, fall on opposite sides of this belief system, but all Paul wants to do is embrace Fremen culture and live as one of them. But bigger plans are at play throughout the galaxy, as the audience gets glimpses outside of the primary setting of northern Arrakis. In this film, we learn more about the Harkonnens, the imperial family and the southern hemisphere of the story's host planet than ever before. And the way this all culminates is a sight to behold. If sci-fi and complex world building isn't your thing, then no, Dune, Part 2 won't be for you. But if you liked the 2021 installment or even felt meh about it, let me tell you that Part 2 is worth watching. Villeneuve took the foundations of the first film and built a masterpiece on top of it. From the start of the film, the cinematography astounded me. Not only does Villeneuve fully immerse us in a desert planet, but he shows us both its beautiful and unforgivable nature. Not once do the practical effects, CGI, or color grading fail, not on Arrakis or the other planets we see. Then there's just the nature of the story and the reactions it was getting from me. It's brutish, then thrilling, then downright eerie. Add this to the spectacular performances the main and supporting cast provides, and you get an incredibly gripping watch. Speaking of the cast, I have to say that I was highly impressed by Chalamet. In the first film, seeing him in action sequences was a little awkward, probably because it's not typical for his usual roles. But in Dune, Part 2, all that awkwardness is thrown out the window. The desert has hardened Paul into a warrior, and Chalamet executes this skillfully. Also, there is no on-screen awkwardness between Chalamet and Zendaya as their characters' romantic relationship blossoms. When I saw them kissing in the trailer, I thought it looked funny. After all, I always see clips of them being best buds in interviews and on red carpets on my social media feeds. But, luckily for me, the setup and execution of their emotions in the film are anything but unnatural. Suffice it to say, I think Dune, Part 2 is twice as good as Part 1. My one piece of proof, if nothing about this review convinced you. Not once was I nodding off this time. In fact, you couldn't have paid me to leave my seat. I went into Dune, Part 2 riding high on having just rewatched the first film, review, read the book, and seen the rave reviews. I was ready to become a changed man and pledge myself to the spice and church of director Denis Villeneuve. Unfortunately, I left with a shrug. Dune, Part 2 changes many pieces of its source material for the better, but unfortunately, the narrative suffers for it. Motivations are muddled, character decisions happen in seconds, and more than anything else, there is no telepathic toddler, and that is a crime. Starting with the great, Denis Villeneuve knows how to shoot a movie. Just like its predecessor, Dune, Part 2 is a spectacle. The scenes are awe-inspiring, the battles have weight, and anything involving the Harkonnens is disturbing in the best way possible. The Harkonnen home planet is incredible to watch and the best 30 minutes of the movie. Austin Butler is absolutely unhinged and the perfect companion for Stellan Skarsgård's Baron. These are menacing villains with real weight and psychopathy. Unfortunately, the same care is not shown to Timothée Chalamet's Paul or Zendaya's Chani. The scenes where it's just these two on screen are hard to watch. The dialogue is painful and delivered on stilts. To be clear, these are two great actors, it just seemed as though they were working with bad source material. In general, I felt that the pieces of the film on Iraqis couldn't decide what type of movie they wanted to be. It bounced between comedy, action, and a little bit of horror with no real staying power. Chani gets a lot more agency than she did in the books, which is wonderful, but it ends up making Paul's actions feel too sudden and unjustified. In the book, this second part takes place over years. In the movie, we're led to believe it all happens in about 9 months, judging by the fact that Paul's mother never gives birth. Changing that timeline makes everything feel rushed and removes the weight from the story. There's a difference between watching Paul lose his mind fighting in the spice for years and fully committing to the Fremen, versus him suddenly deciding he's a messiah in a few months. I get it, having Paul's mother give birth would have meant filming scenes with a telepathic and / or talking toddler, and that's hard to do, but the decision hurt the film. Overall, Dune, Part 2 is gorgeous and fun to watch, but that alone can't carry a movie that's nearly 3 hours. If it were closer to 2 hours, I think I'd have less complaints, but if you're going to keep me for a long time, the plot better be damned good. This film had all the right component parts but didn't get them together in the same way as Dune, Part 1. Austin Butler is phenomenal, and I'll watch him in anything else, but the Iraqis cast fell flat. I'll still see Dune, Messiah in theaters whenever it releases, but I won't call its predecessor the listen Al gave. Before I saw Dune, Part 2, I considered Denis Villeneuve one of the best working directors today. During my friend's wedding week in Mexico last year, shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Lindhers, a group of us talked about movies and one of the questions we asked ourselves was if you could only keep one director alive today, who would it be? My answer wasn't Tarantino or Scorsese, like some expected me to say. It was Denis Villeneuve. You might be more familiar with movies like Prisoners, Sicario, Arrival, and Blade Runner 2049, but movies like Enemy, Incendies, and Polytechnique are also great and came early in Villeneuve's career. After seeing what Denis could do with something like Blade Runner 2049, I was incredibly excited when I heard he was going to adapt Dune for the big screen. At the time, I knew 2 things about Dune, having not read the books. Much of the things I loved growing up, like Star Wars, were inspired heavily by Dune, and it was considered impossible to adapt to film. When Dune, Part 1 came out in 2021, I assembled a group of friends together. We traveled to London, Ontario for the weekend, and we watched it in IMAX. This movie blew me away. Despite having sky-high expectations, this movie somehow exceeded them. Every single aspect of this film, from the direction, performances, cinematography, music, sound, and visual effects, come together to make what I feel will prove to be a generation-defining film. I really do try to not be too hyperbolic when I talk about how much I like or dislike something, but I really believe this will have the same kind of legacy that Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy has. I spent a lot of time thinking about a movie that has felt this epic, and nothing since then comes close. There was a scene in this movie that was so powerful and overwhelming that it brought a tear to my eye both times that I've seen it. It's not a sad scene or anything like that either, but while watching it, I shed tears at the sheer might of what cinema is capable of and how it can make you feel. I also need to take the time to talk about Timothée Chalamet. During the Dune, Part 1 press tour, Villeneuve spoke about how if Chalamet didn't agree to play the lead of Paul Atreides, then he might not have made Dune at all. I'll admit, even as a big fan of Chalamet, I didn't understand exactly what he meant until I saw this movie. For this whole thing to work, you have to believe in Paul Atreides as a commanding, powerful, and compelling figure. When a big change happens for Paul in this movie, Chalamet went somewhere I've never seen him go before, and it blew me away. I felt exactly how the characters felt in those moments, and it has solidified Chalamet as a truly generational talent who will be compelling for years to come. But it's not just Chalamet that stands out in this cast. Almost every single character has moments to shine, and everyone takes the most of the opportunities they are given. Whether it's Javier Bardem as Stilgar, Zendaya as Chani, Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica, or Austin Butler as Phaedra Harkonnen, everyone is just so damn good in this movie. All of the other technical elements of this movie enhance the performances and writing too. I saw this movie twice in IMAX and the sound design is spectacular. You don't just watch or hear the movie, you can feel it in your chest. Musically, Hans Zimmer builds off of his iconic score from Part 1 to enhance every feeling the movie gives you. Visually, this movie is breathtaking. Nearly every shot is something I want to print and hang up on my walls. The cinematography and the visual effects combine for some jaw-dropping shots that come at you one after the other. For a movie that reportedly costs $60 million less to make than most modern blockbusters, there really is no valid excuse to see some of the crap that we've been subjected to over the past few years. Some standout scenes in particular were filmed with infrared cameras, and they work so well to establish this particular world and characters in a way that feels so unique. This movie definitely benefits tremendously too from the ground covered in Part 1. Part 2 doesn't need to spend lots of time establishing the world and characters, and it can focus more on developing the world and characters for a richer experience. It's precisely because of this that I think Part 2 is such a clearly better movie to experience. Like Lord of the Rings though, I don't ever anticipate myself watching one without the other after this theatrical run concludes. In the same way that Tarantino considers Kill Bill to be one movie, I think it's best to consider Dune as one movie too. My only issue with Part 1 was that it very much feels like a Part 1 as it ends in the middle of a story. Dune, Part 2 doesn't face the same issues and ends a note that feels satisfying while also leaving you hungry for more. I will also just say that Oppenheimer will be grateful this award season that Dune, Part 2 was delayed, because I think this is poised for some massive awards recognition next year. Dune, Part 2 was amazing and pushed the limits of what a sci-fi movie can be. I loved watching it in a packed theater and hearing the audience's collective gasps throughout the film. To me, this movie took everything great about the first movie and expanded upon it in a stellar way. This sequel to the 2021 Dune movie, directed by Denis Villeneuve, focuses on the second part of Frank Herbert's novel of the same name. The new franchise is a reboot of the Dune film from 1984, which was less well received by audiences and critics alike. The sequel continues to touch on themes of power and ethnic genocide using science fiction as a backdrop. In Dune, Part 1, Paul Atreides, Timothée Chalamet, is the son of a royal family headed by his parents, Duke Leto Atreides, Oscar Isaac, and Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, who have part control over spice production along with the House of Harkonnen. Spice is a dust-like particle found only on Arrakis, also known as Dune, that allows for space travel. However, long exposure to it gives people the signature blue eyes that are seen in the Fremen. The first one ends as Paul and Lady Jessica are stranded on Dune after Leto dies by the Harkonnens. Immediately following the events of the first film, Paul Atreides and Lady Jessica have been saved by the Fremen people led by Stilgar, Javier Bardem. As Paul learns the ways of the Fremen, they start to believe that he's part of a prophecy detailing a voice from the outer world who will lead them to salvation. However, as Paul has visions of a devastating future detailing the deaths of millions, the House of Harkonnen is planning to continue spice production on the planet Dune. The acting in this movie was a masterclass. The all-star cast was perfect in their roles. Austin Butler stood out as the sinister Phaedra, a Baron of the House of Harkonnen, whose presence was terrifying every time he was on screen. Zendaya also popped off, bringing a sense of power and intimidation to Chani, a member of the Fremen, and stealing every scene she was in with Chalamet. The costuming was on point, which surprised me in a film about space politics. The wardrobes were simultaneously beautiful and haunting, fitting the characters and plot developments perfectly. It allowed you to feel enveloped by the beautiful cinematography and gave it a sense of realism as the movie unfolded. This movie had arguably some of the most impressive shots in modern cinema. Every scene made the world feel more expansive and added depth, although most of it took place on Arrakis, a desert planet. Even when the story shifted off of Arrakis, every scene was so incredibly detailed, it was hard to tear my eyes from the screen. The film is still exposition heavy, similar to the first one, and made the movie feel dragged out at times. That's not to say it's bad, but with the movie's 2-hour and 46-minute runtime, it felt like a bit much. However, unlike its predecessor, the film does make up for it by having more sci-fi action and a lot more sandworms. Dune, Part 2 was one of those cinematic moments like Oppenheimer and Barbie. Watching it in a theater is one of the best ways to experience it. If you're looking for a modern masterpiece, this film is going to be an out-of-this-world experience for you. My sister and I, after watching the first Dune movie, waited the 2 years for this to come out. We were so pumped, and even debated seeing the movie on opening weekend. But because movie crowds have been getting terrible, we decided to wait a week or two before heading out to see the film. I knew that this movie was going to be hype because of the sheer amount of traffic I was getting to this blog. Like my Part 1 post was getting an insane amount of traffic compared to my normal numbers, and I realized everyone was down for the film. That said, in the time that had passed, I read the first book in the series, and thought that it certainly was an interesting take to go down that route, especially in the 1960s. Herbert was brave, I'll give him that, even though the book was way too dry for me to keep reading the series. Anyways, I went into this movie with high expectations. I won't spoil too much of my thoughts until the end of this review, but I think overall I shouldn't have gone in with all of these expectations. Let's get into the review. We pick up right where the last movie left off. The House Atreides has been annihilated by the Harkonnen. We get voiceovers from Princess Irulan, the daughter of the Emperor, speculating that Paul might still be alive. Meanwhile, on Arrakis, Paul and his mother are with Stilgar's group of Fremen. They are moving through the desert when they are spotted by Harkonnen troops, who are now going through the depths of the desert to try and capture or kill any Fremen they come across. They take down the Harkonnen platoon, then head to Sechtabr, a Fremen stronghold. There, Paul and his mother are greeted with suspicion. Some see them as potential spies to take down the Fremen, but Stilgar and his followers, who are from the more religious south, believe he is the Mahdi. The Mahdi is destined to save Arrakis and bring peace and prosperity throughout the land. While Paul is seen as the Mahdi, Jessica is threatened by Stilgar to become the new Reverend Mother. If she doesn't, he will kill her on the spot. She agrees, not revealing she is pregnant, and drinks the water of life. She lives through the poison, but becomes something else. She inherits the memories of all Reverend Mothers before her, but she can also hear the mind of her daughter Alia inside of her. Together, they agree they need to use Paul's power as being seen as the Mahdi, and convince the Northern Fremen he is the Mahdi. Outside, Chani and her friend discuss how the prophecy, in the Northern view, was made to manipulate the Fremen. They don't believe in the Mahdi, but Stilgar and his guys do. Paul restates his intention to fight alongside the Fremen, rather than ruling them, but this sets us up for some major plot points later. Chani and Paul also fall in love while Paul integrates with the Fremen, learning their ways. He adopts a new Fremen name, but a storm is coming their way. The Harkonnens have not done enough to prevent spice raids, and the Baron decides to put his sadistic nephew Phaedratha in charge of Arrakis. We see a scene where he cuts down the last of the Arrakis prisoners in front of a screaming crowd. We see a side plot where the Bene Gesserit sends someone in to get pregnant by him, securing the lineage. On Arrakis, Jessica travels down south after arguing with Paul. Paul is afraid of going south, as he has had visions of a holy war if he goes down there. He then reunites with Gurney while on a raid, and then Gurney shows Paul where all of the nuclear weapons of the Atreides house were hidden. Phaedratha attacks the northern stronghold after that, and everyone is forced to evacuate. Chani's friend is killed in the raid. Taken to the south, Paul Paul is Loki forced to drink the water of life, which usually kills men. Jessica forces Chani to mix her tears into the liquid, but when Paul wakes up, he now can have visions across time and space. He sees his sister on an Arrakis filled with water, and learns his mother is the Baron's daughter. Now changed, Paul sees himself as the Medi, completely switching. Chani is upset by this, and they lure the Emperor to Arrakis. The Fremen plan to attack everyone with sandworms, the bombs, and brute force, and Paul, after crashing the meeting between the Baron and Emperor, kills the Baron. Paul then demands to marry Irulan and get the throne. Feyd-Rautha volunteers to fight Paul as the Emperor's champion, and then Paul, while seemingly losing the duel, kills him. The Emperor gives up his power, but the great houses reject his new rule and come to attack. Paul orders the Fremen to fight back, and Chani leaves, angry at Paul, leaving on a sandworm. I think this is a wonderful movie when it comes to the visual elements. The cinematography in this one reminds me of the beauty of what movies can and cannot be. That said, I don't think the story of Dune is for me. I can really appreciate how it goes against the grain by showing the dangers of a charismatic leader, and I did enjoy how they changed the plot of the books to make Chani more resistant to Paul in this film. I'll still watch the next movie if and when it comes out, as I like Villeneuve's work overall. The Dune books are just way too dense for me, and I found myself liking this movie less than the first one, although it lays the theoretical groundworks of the series, environmental, political, etc. Dune, Part 1, or also simply known as Dune, is a much more stripped-down interpretation of the book. There is really only one plotline, which follows Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet, the heir to the House of Atreides. Dune, Part 1 operates as a standard hero's journey as Paul comes of age and rises to the occasion throughout the film, supplemented by Villeneuve's tremendous vision. Dune, Part 2, however, is an entirely different beast. There are so many parallel plotlines and character arcs in Part 2 that it almost feels overwhelming to process everything that's going on. The key word here is almost. A less skilled director would lose some of their momentum jumping from so many different characters and planets, but not Villeneuve. Villeneuve's grasp on Herbert's source material is so focused that it almost feels surreal to see Herbert's ideas and themes illustrated on the big screen. Furthering his ventures into the sci-fi genre, Denis Villeneuve continues to demonstrate his prowess in visualizing the impossible. Films like Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival indicated Villeneuve as more of a tone poet, whereas films like Incendies, Sicario, and Prisoners accentuated his tenacity towards darker themes and ideas. In a sense, Villeneuve is the ideal filmmaker to tackle a story as grandiose, bleak, and fantastical as Dune. Villeneuve's ability to create such consistent tones and atmospheres is where the bulk of Dune as a story lies. In the most rudimentary terms possible, it's Star Wars for people who prefer Game of Thrones. While that statement is quite reductive on paper, the way Villeneuve imbues the strangeness of sci-fi storytelling with utter sincerity makes the stakes even higher. Whether that be through the immense scale or Hans Zimmer's thundering score, every second of Dune, Part 1 feels vital. Part 2 doubles down on this with a sense of tactility that almost feels effortless. The worlds are bigger and more jaw-dropping. The sounds are louder and more realistic, even if they are sounds for things that don't exist. It's like Dune, Part 1 on steroids. Whereas the color palettes of Dune, Part 1 were beautifully minimalist, making the most of the drab deserts of the planet Arrakis, the color palettes of Part 2 are genuinely unbelievable. Part 2 hits the ground running, starting with an eye-popping sunset action sequence. This scene is shot in such a rich shade of orange that it feels like you're seeing the color for the very first time. Part 2 never fails to take your breath away by simply being present, largely thanks to cinematographer Greig Fraser firing on all cylinders. His work on Dune, Part 1 was awe-inspiring, but the images he captures in Part 2 are mind-bogglingly sublime. In an extended sequence on the planet Guy D' Prime, Villeneuve and Fraser shoot exterior scenes with infrared cameras, resulting in gorgeously imposing monochromatic images. The vastness of Part 2's visual aesthetic surpasses anything I imagined while reading the book, completely exceeding any of my expectations. There were so many moments and scenes that I could not wait to see, and I was not disappointed. On the topic of expectations, there are several changes from the book that were big surprises, but they worked perfectly in the context of a film split into two parts. While I did want to see everything within the novel, I recognize that it just is not possible to do in fragments. Villeneuve splits Dune in half with surgical precision, giving us the fundamentals of the novel while potentially saving other pieces for a third film, Dune, Messiah, the second book in the Dune series. Villeneuve elaborates and expands on Herbert's original intentions by making Paul a much darker character than he was in the novel. Villeneuve's Paul is deeply flawed, extremely unsure of himself, and quite scary at times. Watching Paul's rise to power was as terrifying as it was epic, culminating in a finale that perfectly realizes the severity of Paul's character arc. When Herbert wrote Dune in 1965, some readers recognized the novel as a hero's journey, when Herbert intended it to be seen as a cautionary tale. Make no mistake, Dune, Part 2 is that cautionary tale. Herbert's subversion of the hero's journey was incredible to read, but Villeneuve makes that subversion much darker and more clearly defined than the book. Furthermore, Chani, played by Zendaya, is so much better than her novel counterpart that it actually hurts. She is given so much agency and identity that it feels like a completely different character, operating as her own person rather than Paul's love interest / yes man. She is so much stronger and more opinionated in this iteration, with many beliefs that contest the messianic prophecies about Paul. This results in such an interesting tug of war in not only Paul and Chani but the entire Fremen race as a whole. It's a thought-provoking microcosm of the dangers of belief, and the microcosm grows as the word is spread. Chani exists as our anchor in this film, clearly seeing through all of the conspiracies and lies that have been sown into the Fremen's religion. As Paul's character goes down a darker and scarier path, Villeneuve and co-writer John Spates expertly shift the emotional core from Paul to Chani, with an extremely drastic, and welcome, change from the book that I did not see coming. This might be the best performance from Zendaya, and she is absolutely a standout from a cast that consists of standouts. Speaking of standouts, I refuse to gloss over the chameleonic transformation of Austin Butler into the menace that is Fade Radha Harkonnen. Being so soon after his Oscar-nominated turn as the King of Rock in Elvis, I purposefully avoided marketing material of Butler so that I could hear his new voice in Part 2, and it was such a surprise it genuinely made me appreciate him more as an actor. On top of a grotesque physical transformation and a psychotic demeanor, Butler sounds so much like Stellan Skarsgård, who plays Baron Harkonnen, Fade Radha's uncle, that it's a shock that Butler isn't one of the Skarsgård brothers. Butler is so clearly having fun with this role but resists the pitfalls of such a kitschy performance. He's hamming it up without overdoing it. He chews up the scenery so well that I could watch an extra 3 hours of this character. I was looking forward to seeing this iteration of Fade Radha, and I was not disappointed. If I could endlessly blather about the laundry list of memorable performances, lines, shots, moments, and ideas, I would be writing for days about how blown away by Dune, Part 2 I am. Not in my life would I have thought that Dune, Part 2 would be even better than the book, but here we are. My expectations were through the roof, and they were exceeded tenfold. Very rarely are we, as an audience, subject to a great series of films. Plenty of mega-blockbuster series have graced theater screens in my lifetime, but I would argue that not since the Lord of the Rings trilogy have we had a film saga of the magnitude and quality that Denis Villeneuve's Dune has accomplished, and it is my hope that future installments continue to live up to this reputation. Now we have Dune, and it's here to stay. A new benchmark for contemporary sci-fi / blockbuster filmmaking, Dune, Part 2 will go down in history as one of the greatest movie sequels of all time. Upon hearing that Denis Villeneuve was making Dune, I remember thinking there was no better director to take on Frank Herbert's science fiction classic. That sentiment was proven right with the release of Villeneuve's 2021 feature, the jaw-dropping first chapter of his masterful big-screen epic. After a brief delay following last year's Hollywood labor disputes, Dune, Part 2 is finally here and sees Villeneuve reuniting with the first film's incredible cast and talent behind the camera. Villeneuve's first venture was an immersive and breathtaking introduction to Herbert's universe, captured through the passionate lens of a visionary filmmaker. Part 2 picks up the story right where its predecessor left off and then expands on it through intensive world building and character work. A few brilliantly cast new faces are added, seamlessly fitting into the rich and complex world. Then there are the many returning faces, a star-studded ensemble who once again bring their fascinating array of characters to life. Much like the previous film, Dune, Part 2 offers up a visual feast. The spectacular locations, the thrilling set pieces, and the outstanding costume design are just some of what makes the movie such a stunner. But perhaps more impressive is Villeneuve's amazing ability to artfully translate Herbert's dense and complex story to the big screen. Politics, religion, and mythology play significant roles in Dune and add intriguing layers to the storytelling. And Villeneuve and his co-writing partner Jon Spaihts don't shortchange any of those elements. As a refresher, the Dune films are set in the distant future within an empire known as the Imperium. Leading the Imperium is the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, played in Part 2 by Christopher Walken, who oversees several great and minor houses. Among them is the noble House Atreides and their mortal enemies, House Harkonnen. At the center of the main conflict is Arrakis, a harsh desert planet that is the lone source of the most valuable commodity in the universe, spice melange. Through devious plotting and subterfuge, Shaddam uses House Harkonnen to annihilate House Atreides after feeling threatened by the popularity of its beloved leader, Duke Leto. What he didn't count on was Leto's son Paul surviving and forming an alliance with the Fremen, the native inhabitants of Arrakis. Part 2 picks up with the lone survivors of House Atreides, Paul, Timothée Chalamet, and his pregnant mother, Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, working to earn the trust of the Fremen people. Many among the Fremen suspect them of being spies. But tribe leader Stilgar, Javier Bardem, defends them, believing Paul to be their prophesied messiah. Meanwhile, Paul continues to grow closer to Chani, Zendaya, a Fremen warrior who thinks the prophecy is nonsense but who stands by Paul as he assimilates into her culture. Paul and the Fremen intensify their guerrilla raids on the Harkonnen spice harvesters, which inevitably gets the attention of the ruthless house leader Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, a devilishly sinister Stellan Skarsgård. Out of patience with his nephew Rabban, Dave Bautista, the overseer of spice production on Arrakis, the Baron replaces him with his younger nephew, the psychotic Phaedra, Austin Butler. Elsewhere, the word of Paul's survival and rise to power among the Fremen reaches the Emperor, who has desperately worked to conceal his involvement in the House Atreides slaughter. Those are just some of the tensions that grow throughout the absorbing story with its many moving pieces. Part 2 has its rousing moments, some romance, and even prickly family drama. But it's the thematic depth that makes it so intriguing. Take the wicked undercurrent of manipulation and deception that's felt throughout the film, almost always in the service of power and control. We see it in the hegemonization of cultures through the planting of false religions and in the wielding of political might to maintain power. We even see it the efforts to build an army in the name of the greater good. To no surprise, Dune, Part 2 is a technical achievement, complete with thrilling action, dazzling visual effects, and unmatched artistic vision. DP Greg Fraser captivates with his camera, whether shooting the vast sun-scorched dunes of Arrakis or intimate close-ups that peer deep behind the eyes of the characters, whether capturing hypnotic and sometimes unsettling dream sequences or fierce sprawling combat sequences and sandworm surfing. There is never a moment when his images aren't appealing in one way or another. And it's all accented by Hans Zimmer's penetrating score. Dune, Part 2 clicks perfectly into place with the first film and builds upon it in a number of scintillating ways. The performances shine from top to bottom, none brighter than Austin Butler's. And the sheer craft on display, along with the extraordinary storytelling, results in an awe-inspiring and mature science fiction blockbuster that immediately left me hoping for a part 3. Will we get one? Rumor has it a script is nearly finished. But as always, it will depend on how this one does at the box office. Hopefully it gets the audience it deserves. Dune, Part 2 opens in theaters today. I need to be clear when coming into this that this might have been the most excited I have been to see a film since maybe The Lord of the Rings. I adore this universe, okay, only the first 3 books, don't at me, and to see the first film not only get the universe they were adapting but also have the budget to show it off. Well, there is a reason it was my favorite film of 2021. However, that is a lot of expectation, and in my experience, that can be a recipe for disaster. So to set the scene, the plan of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, Stellan Skarsgård, has succeeded. With the help of Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, Christopher Walken, Arrakis/Dune is his, the Atreides are dead, the millennia-long feud is over, and Phaedra Harkonnen, Austin Butler, is getting ready to take over from his incompetent brother Glossurabin Harkonnen, Dave Bautista. There is only one problem, not all the Atreides are dead, for Paul, Timothée Chalamet, and Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, made it through the desert to the Fremen people and are now in the hands of Stilgar, Javier Bardem, and Chani, Zendaya. It was safety brought with a blood price, which is increasing as the Harkonnen troops send patrols deeper into the desert. For Paul, his new place with the Fremen could be a way to find revenge for the destruction of his family, but is he ready for leadership to be thrust upon him? For once the Fremen are unleashed, can they be stopped? There are a lot of things that I could talk about here, but the first one has to be the casting. Few films are so impeccably cast as this was, with no weak links and everyone doing something interesting. Javier Bardem is having a blast, and it shows, given he has some of the best lines in the entire film. Timothée Chalamet is just as commanding as he needs to be. Even if we never get Dune Messiah, I think we got a taste of it here. Zendaya shines as Chani and gives the character some more depth. Rarely has someone completely captured a character in an instant, as Austin Butler did with Phaedra Harkonnen. It's entirely menacing but with some added complexity. Even some of the characters that are playing small parts absolutely nail that role. Léa Seydoux was as fascinating as she was dangerous as Lady Margot Fenring. Christopher Walken walked the line between being commanding and impotent as the Emperor, which you love to see. I also loved the energy that Florence Pugh brought to Princess Irulan, completely observant and with conflicting loyalties. It was a joy to watch the performances alone because all you wanted was more of Dave Bautista, more of Stellan Skarsgård, more of everyone. After all, it was that good. As with the first film, the entire production design of the film is outstanding. You can tell the amount of work that all the artisans have put together because everything works in a weirdly wonderful way. There is the scale of the visuals. Things in the Dune universe are not small, and you feel that presence here. You get action scenes happening in and around the large harvesters where cover is constantly on the move. It helps create that tension that you need in every encounter. But more than that, it becomes a visual reminder of the sheer scale of the task that the Fremen are trying to accomplish with their guerrilla tactics up against a monolith of power. Using the visual style to help support the underlying themes of the film is one of the areas where Dune truly thrives, so it was great to see it replicated in the second outing. We also get a lot more juxtaposition of locations this time around as we cut to different planets like Kitane and Giedi Prime throughout the runtime. These help make sure that the desert does not become overwhelming in the mind but also help remind you of the stakes that exist in this universe. I loved the visual styling of the Harkonnen home planet and how it shifted from outside to inside. It also helped contextualize the visual design choice of the Harkonnens from the first film. It is weird and grimy and a perfect fit for people who see the world in black and white because that is baked into their everyday existence. While the first film dabbled with religion and prophecy, Part 2 dives into this hard. which is perfectly understandable because this is the darker and messy part of the novel that the film is adapting. To explore this, they have taken some shifts in the Fremen to create a more multifaceted people, or at least a two-faceted people. You also see the Atreides get in the weeds in some messy and uncomfortable ways, which is something more implied in the book, and I like that they show it here. I do think it was a good idea to be a bit more prescriptive about this side of Dune because it gives you a better idea of what is coming, which is probably one of the strengths of adapting a work when you know the end point. One area that I am still mulling over while writing this review is some of the other changes that they made to the story. While I will try to be vague, timelines get a bit truncated, relationships don't quite match the source material, and there are some missing characters and moments. Some of these issues flow one from the other, which leads to the film having a significantly higher ultrasound component than I was expecting. But how they resolved that was fascinating. This does have the outcome of shortchanging some characters like Lady Jessica and uplifting others like Paul. Still, those are the understandable choices that you have to make when adapting a work to a different medium. I am not entirely sure about the other changes. It will probably take at least another viewing to be certain. It is clear that they had the future of this franchise in view when making this film, with at least one cameo that made me go, "Oh, that will be a good choice in the next film." The big difference for me is that the timeline changes make some character actions feel absolutely fine in the context of the film adaptation, even if it runs contrary to their actions in the novel, and that is the juxtaposition that I am still processing. In some places, these choices make the film a bit less weird, and in others, it ramps up the weirdness, which makes for some odd moments. Also, while I know that the film was meant to be thematically messy, some moments were more visually gloomy than they needed to be. In the end, do we recommend Dune, Part 2? Absolutely. This is an absolutely stunning work of art where every department on the production, from costumes, to location scouts, to visual effects, and more, have come together to put something majestic on screen. It can be messy, bloody, and brutal at times, but that is the world it is working in. Now, I want to watch Part 1 and Part 2 back to back to see how they flow together. If you like Dune, Part 2, we would recommend to you The Northman. By Brian McNamara. You can follow Brian on Twitter here. When he's not chatting about movies and TV, he'll be talking about international relations, or the solar system. Have you watched Dune, Part 2? Let us know what you thought in the comments below. Feel free to share this review on any of the social medias and you can follow us here. Check out all our past reviews and articles here, and have a happy day. This film, directed by Denis Villeneuve, screenplay by Denis Villeneuve, based on Dune, produced by Mary Parent, starring Timothée Chalamet, cinematography Greg Fraser, edited by Joe Walker, music by Hans Zimmer, production company Legendary Pictures, distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures, release dates February 6, 2024, running time 165 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $190 million, box office $700